Hello, this is Jeff Johnston, host of the Living Undeterred podcast. Welcome to this episode with Richard Battle, and I'm very excited to have this conversation. He's got a great story, and as you can see behind him, he has a number of books. He's a very well-known author, very well-known speaker, and I've had an opportunity and an honor to follow him on social media. And we linked up through a mutual friend of ours, Doug Wagner, who most of you know. Doug is, full disclosure, a board member of my nonprofit, and Doug has introduced me to some great people, and Richard will be no exception. So, Richard, great to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
I am too. I know I could spend an hour probably on each one of your books, but we're not going to have time on that today. But in looking at your bio and in the pre-conversation we had a couple weeks back, a lot of what you do comes from a place of pain and trauma that you went through years ago. I think we can navigate at that at some point and talk about what happened that has given you kind of a new perspective, a new lens on life. But where do you find the motivation and the inspiration to just keep coming up with tremendous books that you've been writing over the years?
Well, it's very interesting from the standpoint I never dreamed I'd be where I am right now. And that when I left the corporate world after many years, I was looking to try to serve on some corporate boards and write some business books and move that direction. But other life events and somebody telling me that there are 1,000 of those type business books, you ought to write your experiences that you had and some other things that may last longer. So I developed, my mission is to provide timeless, positive messages of proven principles, helping people win each day. So everything I try to do, even though it may have some current events tied to it, is tying it to principles that if somebody picks it up 50 years from now, they can still benefit from the idea. That's the hope.
Yeah, and I went through, I've only written one book in my life, but I kind of went through the same thing when I talked to my publicist, and he said, there's lots of people out there that have lost a child. You're not the only one that's ever had that happen. Obviously, we'll talk about your situation as well, Richard. But he said, you got to make your book different. You got to make your book something about it where people are going to pick it up and they're not just going to hear the sad story of what happened, but they're going to put it down and feel really good about something in that book. And I've had a chance to look through a couple of your books, and there's a lot of inspiration, there's a lot of motivation, and there's a lot of hope in what you write about. And does that come from what happened to you years ago?
Well, definitely a part of that, but I have a deep faith that we're here for a reason. And as long as we're here to find out what that reason is and execute it. And so that's what drives me, is based on my experiences, good and bad, which I've been blessed to have some really great experiences too, and then have some challenges. But I try to be a student of those so that when I have an adverse experience, I learn the lesson I think I'm supposed to learn, so I don't have to suffer twice for one lesson. And then my motivation is to try to share things so others can learn and be inspired from my experience, so they may not have to experience the suffering or experience directly, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense, and we're in a world today, and specifically our country, where there's a lot of people hurting for some self-induced reasons, other reasons beyond their control. You talk about winning the day, and I hear that a lot. Matter of fact, that's one of my 12 steps in my book. One of my 12 daily steps was, win the day, nothing more, nothing less. If you had to really break that down, what would winning the day be for Richard Battle?
Well, that's a great question. In my corporate life, it was very much planned and goal-oriented and executing the goal with very little listening and deviation based on interruptions or things that came up. Now
Right.
I have goals and I'll have things I want to do, but it is amazing the difference at the end of the day when I get ready to go to bed and I review the day, how often I've accomplished something or had something really great happen that wasn't in my plan that day. And I may not have accomplished everything that was in my plan, but in retrospect, the days are better because of the adjustments, the adaptation that made to inspiration that came, or someone that came in that I didn't expect that day, and I was able to communicate with them and share something that just made the day better for both of us. And so that to me is just breathtaking how often that happens.
How long ago did you leave corporate?
I left corporate at the end of 2017.
Oh, okay, so pretty
After,
recently.
yeah, pretty recently, after 40 plus years of revenue responsibility and people responsibility, and just a very structured, more structured life. Now I'm a free agent and have the freedom to respond to when I hear the Spirit, and I've been humbled many times to have been given ideas and inspiration. In bed, I've been awakened with specific inspiration to write or share with people, driving down the road in church, many different places, because I find myself more open and receptive to hearing that kind of communication than I might have been before. And again, it's just amazing, and it's led to all kinds of different creations and experiences that I didn't foresee or dream about.
Why do you think so many people are unhappy?
Boy, that's another great question.
I got more for you as we go on, so.
I think expectations, false expectations.
Yeah.
And I think the world creates false expectations for people. It creates material expectations for us. It creates expectations of how other people ought to be in relationship with us. And when we try to live those false expectations and they don't happen, then we'll be unhappy. And if we look at a longer term future, if we look at a less materialistic future, if we look in the future versus the past, which we talked about in the pre-call the other day, I think that's important. When we look to help others versus looking at our current situation.
Yeah.
When I look at myself, I may find something, if I'm having tough challenges, it can be easy to become depressed. But
Right.
whenever I think about others and something I may say or do to help others, that depression goes away. And there's a joy that you receive when you help others, however little it is. And one of the things I say is the greatest gift we can give anyone is the gift of encouragement. It costs us nothing, and there's no telling how it may affect someone's future and their lives. And just one little positive word at the right time. We never know how that may turn someone loose into the future who achieves great things because of a word that we shared. And it's so simple.
That's so true, because you never know what people are going through when you bump into them day to day. You're at the store, you're in a parking lot, and somebody cuts you off. You got to think to yourself, maybe that person just got served divorce papers today. Maybe he just got back from the funeral of his mom who died of cancer. Maybe he just got fired today. And have some compassion with people. And I know I practice what's called mindfulness meditation. And it's a practice where you actually think of people you don't really like. You think of people that annoy you, that have been mean to you, that maybe it could be someone in your past years ago, or someone that maybe it's your neighbor. You just, for some reason, you don't like them. And you think kind thoughts about that person. And you actually wish them a good day. You talk out loud. You say, may you be happy. Sounds corny. It sounds cheesy. But as you go through your day and you bump into people, people are looking at you with the same lack of vision. They don't know anything about you. They don't know what you've been through, And I think if we all could, each one of us, our small part, just become a better human being from just the perspective of understanding that everybody has something going on, that I think we could progress a little bit better as a society, and if anything, maybe collectively become a little happier,
Yeah, two things. I think that's great. And the first is where I really understood that was when I was sitting in the hearse getting ready to take the procession for my son's funeral. and burial. And as we were driving down the road and I looked out and saw the other traffic and cars going by, and I was crushed in spirit, and I'm thinking, how can they be living life when this is
Yeah.
going on? But it was
Yeah.
totally focused on me and not
Right.
focused on the bigger picture. And it was interesting. And so I understood that while I may have gone through that day, others are going through it other days when I'm not going through something like that. And then the other piece of that that I think fits well is I think the greatest gift we can give ourselves is forgiving others' transgressions against us.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
When that lesson came home to me is in the 1980s. I was a straight commission sales guy, but I took all my savings and invested in rental real estate. And everything was going well for 8 or 9 years, and I was building assets in a portfolio. And then the real estate crash hit, and the
Yeah.
market turned upside down. And over a course of 3 years, I lost a lot of money, and
Yeah.
a lot of money. I had people abuse me, tenants, people that bought properties and reneged on it that I had to foreclose on.
Yep.
And I finally came to the realization that if I hated them or held a grudge against them, they didn't care. So the only person that grudge hurt was me. And I
Yeah.
realized that if I just would forget about that, forget about them, that way I could let go and live in the future and not live in the past. And that freed me. And so when we forgive others, it's the greatest gift we can give ourselves.
It's certainly there's a sense of liberation when you can look at someone who's angry. Maybe they're angry at you for whatever reason, and you can say, I have no control over the way they feel towards me, but I certainly have control over how I feel towards myself. And I just wrote a blog that posted last week it's called Are You an Imposter? And I wrote about imposter syndrome and how that's permeated society. I had never heard of the word just until, the last couple of years. And now it's thrown around a lot. And it's just, we sit on social media, we watch people, we think, wow, I'm not productive. Richard's writing 8 books. I've only written 1, So I'm obviously not as good as Richard because he has 8 books. And I think we all play that to an extent. Some of us play it to the point where we get depressed and we drink and we do drugs and we commit suicide because we have a really hard time adapting to who we are. And I think there is something to say about being comfortable in your own skin. And it's okay to look at someone else, but I'm genuinely happy when I see somebody do something that I'm not doing. I'm very happy, and it's taken a lot of years for me to practice through my meditation to get to that point. But I have to say, I don't have a lot of jealousy in me. I just don't, and I'm only 55, so I got a lot of years left where I can use this practice to not be an angry, bitter old man.
Well, exactly. And I'm further along on the age scale. By the time you get where I'm at, you may have 20 books out. Who knows? I think,
Yeah.
again, that's the world trying to get us to compare ourselves to the Joneses.
Yeah.
And compare in materialistic type ways. And I saw someone say, really, the only person we should compare ourselves to is ourselves the day before or yesterday. And if we're better today than we were yesterday, that's great. And so the way I say it is, what we do today and tomorrow and the rest of our tomorrows is more important than what we did yesterday.
It's funny you say that because I write down, and I'm sure you do too. I have to write down because I'll forget, like my to-do list. I know some books say don't do to-do lists, others say it works for me. But the problem is I don't get to them. And I end up having these carryovers where I'll have 5 tasks carryover, and then the next day it's 9, and then it's 10. And I finally just decided, you know what? If I have something on my to-do list, I don't get it done, 9 times out of 10, I just delete it. I just never do it. And you know what? Time goes by, nothing happens bad. Most times there's not any repercussions. And I've tried to get down to thinking of my day as in 1 or 2 tasks that I have to get done today. Like one of my tasks today was twofold. I had to start talking to people about my tour next summer, the Living Undeterred U.S. tour that we're going to raise hopefully $1 million for mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. And And I also need to tee up some more podcast guests like you. So pretty much all I've done today is work the phones, work my contacts to plan for next summer. And also I've set 2 more interviews for future guests for my show. Now I didn't get to the 8 other things on my to-do list, but that's okay. I felt like I accomplished something
Yes.
today, right? I mean, do you think
Absolutely.
if people broke their daily lives down to little battles like that, you think that a lot more stress would be relieved?
Yes, yes, it would, and I agree. I have a list of things that I can do every day. There's never an end to them. But here's what I would say: a dream delayed is not a dream denied.
Perfect.
All right, because you may do some of those things a year from now or 5 years from now. And the story I love to tell is about Laura Ingalls Wilder, who most people know wrote the Little House on the Prairie series. And I won't give you
Right.
how I kind of got into looking at her life, but I always thought she wrote the books as diaries as a little girl. And she did not write the books. She was writing newspaper and magazine articles after her husband died, and her daughter just begged her to write about the story she told as a little girl. And she didn't publish her first book till she was 65 years old. She published her
Really?
9th book when she was 76. She
Wow.
died at 90 years old. 17 years after she died was when the TV series came out. And that TV show's on almost 24 hours a day now. And so the
Yeah.
whole point is we never know what we'll do when or when it may impact someone beyond our lifetimes. And so all we can do is every day as we're given those things to do is try to put the bricks down the best we can and do the things that we get to do until our time here is done, and then leave the results and the timing of the results into the big man upstairs' hands.
I mean, what a great story, because I kind of, every time you hear a story, you kind of relate it back to your own life. So you start thinking about how does that make sense? And so in my case, I look at my 32-year investment career, and, for most part, it was enjoyable, but I don't really think I was making a impact on society as much as I've done in 4 years with my projects and what I'm doing now. I think I've accomplished in 4 what I did in 30 in my previous life. And yet I have never made much money on all this I'm doing with my Living Undeterred, my books, all that stuff. Yet I've got so much more satisfaction out of it. And there's an interesting dilemma there, I guess, or a story behind that when people are out seeking joy and they are trying to fill joy with happiness. Happiness can be fleeting. Happiness can be very short term. And we got to find joy in our lives. You got to find a passion. I've got a quote that you've heard me say, purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. And, I think that's what really happened to me. And Richard, I'm sure in your life you can find those pivot points where you just all of a sudden on a dime changed. And that happened to me twice, losing my son and then losing my wife 4 months ago. I've had these pivot points, but I've come out of it stronger, healthier, and a better person. And I think there's something to be learned from someone else's unfortunate situation.
Yeah, we're the sum of our whole lives. And people ask me, well, how many books are you selling? And I'll tell them, well, yeah, I'm selling books, but that's not my calculus. And I'll tell
Right.
people if only my daughter, and if she has kids in the future and future family, if they're the only ones that ever look at it and gain something out of it, it'll be worthwhile.
Right.
But I know others have based on feedback I've gotten. And that feedback, you talk about the old credit card priceless commercials, that feedback's priceless. I had a
Right.
lady, when our gym reopened after the 2 weeks to shut down and save everybody from the COVID in May of 2020, I was standing in line to check in, and a lady turned around. She goes, I really enjoyed your book. And before I could ask her which one, and I'd seen her at
Yeah.
church, but I didn't know her name, and I was going to ask her which one, she said, Surviving Grief by God's Grace, about the loss of my son. And I didn't
Right.
ask her why it touched her or anything, but that book's been out 19 years now. And so to know that someone's been touched by it recently, that adds impact to my son's life. And and just adds validation for the effort to put in to share the story to try to help other people.
I'm gonna ask you two questions. What was the most enjoyable book for you to write, and which one do you think's been the most impactful?
Wow, that's a great question, and there's a tie into both. All 8 to this point have had enjoyment tied with them. They all have a story behind them. They all have a different purpose. One of the most difficult things I have in people when they try to get me to speak or other things, they always want to pin you down to what genre do you write in, what subjects do you speak about. And I'm very difficult to pin down because I've spoken on many different topics and written on many topics, and I find it scares people. They don't really know how to deal with that. I think the most impactful are the 2, Surviving Grief and Unwelcome Opportunity, because they're both faith-based books about overcoming life's challenges and how a faith in a creator who can help us overcome challenges, and so we don't have to try and rely on ourselves to face adversity by ourselves. And I think I would hate to be someone without faith going through COVID and other difficulties and trying to do it by myself. And I think that creates a lot of depression and suicides and things of that nature also, because we focus on what we don't have. We find we're unable to take care of ourselves. And so there's nowhere to go if you don't put your faith in something bigger than ourselves to help us through those situations.
And that's where being connected, and I think Johann Hari, who's a writer about addiction and substance abuse and so forth, talked about the opposite of addiction was connectivity, being connected. And I think there's a lot to go with when I went through my grieving. I shouldn't say when I went through, like I'm over it. I'm not, and I never will be. And I don't want to be over it, because that means I want to forget about 2 people I care about, and I don't want to ever forget about them. So, but I think I go back and look at what saved me, and it was the connection with my other 2 boys, Roman and Ian, my parents still alive, my coworkers, my neighbors, people I met on LinkedIn and social media like you. That kept my ship righted, as I could build a new foundation through meditation and reading and writing and starting my nonprofit, all these things that was a normal outlet for someone with attention deficit that constantly need to be doing something. All that packaged together became my toolkit for grieving, to the point where I feel like I'm at a pretty good place right now, and again, I'm 120 days removed from burying my wife of 21 years. And people may say, well, it's almost like you don't care, Jeff. Well, no, I care. That's the opposite of that. I care enough that I'm also a realist, that I know we all die. And we don't always die in the right order or a convenient time or on our terms. Matter of fact, more often than not, we don't die in any way like that at all. Yeah. And so you mentioned preparedness. I think it was you said preparedness. I love that word. I had someone ask me one time, it's like, what's the one word you would give to help somebody that's about to go through what you've been through? And I said preparedness. Being prepared for the inevitability of things like death and, things that happen that are just part of the deal you make when you're born, And I think as a society, we have a hard time dealing with things that are inevitably coming to all of us down the road. And when they do happen, we're like stunned, and then we don't know how to handle it. And it could be a function of many things. It could be parents coddling us. It could be society painting this romantic, fake Hollywood image that, I don't know. It just seems to me there's a lot of issues that we can work through to help our kids become more, improving their overall self-worth and well-being. I mean, there's a lot that we can definitely improve on. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Well, yes. And what I tell people is I don't grieve where my son is. I grieve where he isn't. Mm-hmm. And
that's good.
He's in eternity, and I trust he's with the Creator. And my job here, as long as I'm here until I'm taken away, is to do things to make the most of what I'm instructed to do. And that's the way I look at it. And so, yes, I don't like it that he's not here. I wish he was here. I missed him growing up and being a father and things of that nature, but I can't control that. So I can only
Right.
do the things I can do. And the question is, do we try to do something positive and constructive, or do we come back and focus on the past and inward and just end up not doing anything constructive but having a destructive behavior?
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that because I have looked at people that have handled things very, from my perspective, well, and they've turned their life into a we story, not a me story. And as they navigate through life, they're bringing in people, to like, you know, subconsciously or consciously help them form this team around them where they have this support system. And you've been around those people when all they do is project their story constantly. After a while, you're like, okay, I like to talk to Jeff, but all he wants to talk about is what happened to him.
Yeah.
And I was that guy for a while.
Yeah.
And something kind of resonated with me. I think I was talking to a gentleman who had lost similar type situation. But the first half hour I talked to him, he never even brought it up. And I was bringing it up in the first couple of sentences. And I thought, all right, I got to learn from this. There's got to be a way I can still get to my point of talking about Seth, but not shoving it down people's throats. And so I think there's a great aspect of vulnerability, Richard. But I also think vulnerability can be a big turnoff for some people as well.
Well, they don't know how to respond, and people don't
Yeah,
know how
good.
to respond when
Right.
anyone's grieving. People don't know what to say, and sometimes they'll say things that are well-meaning, but they're more hurtful than helpful. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you've experienced that as
Yeah.
well. And we have to give them grace because they mean well, even though they may say something that's hurtful. And again, it's the same type thing. We who have lost have to figure out how do we communicate or not. A lot of times people don't know. I've had that loss of a son. You may experience the same thing with your son and wife where people won't know. And something will come up and you can relate, well, yeah, I wish I didn't have this experience, but I've had this experience. And,
Yeah.
there may be some things I can share with you. James Street, who was a famous athlete in the Austin area, when his son was getting ready to go in the major leagues and he was complimenting him, he said, the good ones learn from their mistakes. The great ones learn from the mistakes of others. And the corollary is the same thing with us helping people, is that people can learn from their own experiences, but if they learn from others' experiences, then that's even better because they don't have to have the loss to get the knowledge. And I certainly
Yeah, I
wish
write.
I would have learned from knowledge versus experience on several things.
Yeah, I echo that as well. I remember a conversation I had with my youngest son a few years after Seth had died, and I write about this in the book, where he had came to me in one of the talk, and he said, Dad, I'm just not over Seth's death. And, I listened to it. I tried to understand where this was coming from. And then after we talked a little bit more, I said, I think you're setting yourself up for disappointment, Roman, because you're asking yourself to get over something that is not possible to get over.
Yeah.
It's a mountain that's too high to climb. So you know what? Go around it. Don't climb over it. Go through it or go around it. And what I meant by that is absorb your brother's death into your story
Yeah.
instead of trying to bury it and acting as if it never happened.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with a lot of grief today, is that people just say, "Oh, I'm going to get over it." I hate that term. I don't like the get over it philosophy. I don't like building up scar tissue, and I just think those are rhetorical answers that don't have a lot of meaning to me. I'd rather say, you know what, your brother died, but instead of trying to get over it, just carry Seth with you every day. Absorb him into you and live your life for him, but honor him because he's no longer here. And you can honor him by not drinking, by not smoking, by not skipping school, by not, stealing and doing. That's how you honor Seth.
Yeah.
And then you'll live a good life, and he's with you, and he was only 16 at the time when I was having this talk, so it's hard to be too deep with the 16-year-old. But I thought there was a life lesson there. There was a moment that I could learn as a dad, that instead of just being that Dr. Phil, Bobby Knight, rah, tough love, you know what? You're not going to get over his death, and that's perfectly okay. I'm not sure why you want to get over his death.
Yeah, I know. I think that was a great lesson for your son. I think we all model as examples, and you're modeling with the positive things you're doing is an example where, whether your sons say it or not, they have to think, well, if this is how Dad can handle this, I ought to be able to handle it well also. And that's
Right.
a positive way to deal with this, because we have to end up being realist in dealing with it. Well, dealing with it means we go on and do something positive, not just like we would if we didn't have the experience, but I think even better. Because of the experience, we are more understanding and caring to try to do things to help others than we would be if we didn't suffer the loss and grief.
You're either getting better or you're not, right? I mean, there's no such thing as staying the same. Even each day, a little piece of us dies. You're either trying to improve by exercising or dieting or reading or doing a podcast, whatever, or you're regressing, you're going backwards. And I think the challenge for me, even though I don't do what you do, I think you and I both have similar types of people we talk to, is, making sure that we can do this in the context of being a positive person. And I was going to ask you this question. Have you always been an optimistic, positive person? And is that something that's always, because I wasn't. I had an anger issue back in my teenage days. I would consider myself highly overly competitive, at a fault, where if I lost something, I would break something. And I learned probably in my 30s, meeting some people in the sales side of financial services, how to be very optimistic and positive, kind of that Zig Ziglar mentality. So I'm going to ask you again, have you always been optimistic? Have you always been a positive person?
Yes, and I've had the ability, thankfully, to be able to deflect the negativism of others and not let it affect me. I was laughing because I did an interview with a lady on the radio the other day in Colorado, and her comment was that I was the antidote to that which brings you down, which I was very humbled and honored when she said that. So
that's a pretty good compliment.
Our attitude shapes so much of what we do. Yeah. And just being positive will make people want to be with us more. It'll help us impact people more. No one wants to be around someone negative. I worked with a guy for 9 years. Right. I was in Austin, he was in Houston, and every time I called him on the phone, I'd say, "Bob, how you doing?" And his answer every time was, "Not worth a DAM, you know what." And just negative, and just other people that would talk to him, he'd bring down. But I was always trying to pull him up and get him to think something positive. And
could you do that? Did it work?
Unfortunately, not with him. I think there's others, though, that we can help, like when you changed and saw it. And I think when people see positive people and we deal with the same things they're dealing with, they're going to want to say, how does he do that? And what do they rely on to help them go through these experiences and handle them in a more productive way than a negative way? And so I think that's healthier for us, but it's also healthier for the people that look up to us. And it's so funny. We always I think the best leadership's by example. And the story I tell, that's because everyone's an example to someone else. It doesn't matter how old or young or what our positions are. And one of the days I was most humble about my example, I came home when my daughter was about 2, and it was the first time she ever had popcorn. And her mother had taught her to take one piece out of the bowl and eat it one piece at a time. Well, I came in, grabbed a fistful of popcorn and went back in the other room and shoved it in my mouth and went back in the other room to change clothes. And when I came back where she was grabbing a fistful of popcorn and shoving it in her mouth.
Sure.
And I realized here she was 2 years old, and that was my example to her. And it took her mother a while to unteach her what I had taught her. But we all are examples to others, and we don't know when someone's looking to us for an example.
Right.
And it may not be something we say, it may be something we do. And we all fail periodically. And unfortunately, we fall on our faces and everything. And that's not an issue, but it's how we deal with that and then how we go forward. And people will see it and say, wow, maybe I can learn something from that. And that's what I hope, that I can overcome my failures and leave positive examples for people.
I was talking with someone the other day, and they made a comment that was meant to be humbling. You know, I didn't overly look at it that way, but they said something to the effect that, well, you know, Jeff, you're wired differently. You're just unique. You're just, and basically kind of inferring that I was almost lucky or I was born this way.
Yeah.
And what people don't see is how much work it has taken me to get to be this guy right now. An enormous amount of work. I mean, suicidal ideation, alcoholism, hundreds of sleepless nights, wandering around my house at 3 a.m, crying, going through boxes, just lying on the floor, just quit drinking, exercising, eating healthy, reading, avoiding toxic people, doing podcasts where I'm meeting optimistic people like you every single day. My whole life right now, I'm around people like Richard Battle. Like I'll talk to like 10 Richard Battles today. How in the hell can I have a bad day when I'm talking to people that all they do is uplift you? Yeah. So I've worked very, very hard to get where I'm at. And I don't plan on losing it. I don't plan on falling back because I like where I'm at with my life right now. I'm in a very good place emotionally. It certainly doesn't mean that I was born this way or I was lucky or I don't care about the people I've lost. Yeah. Just the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just the opposite.
I think being positive is a choice. And maybe I made it earlier for whatever reason, but it's been reaffirmed over and over as I've seen negative people and seen that destructive behavior and things like that. Every time I see that, I'm grateful to be positive, and it reinforces that choice because the world wants to beat us down.
Yeah.
It's the sad thing. And I mean, if you watch the news too much, if you watch pop culture, it's all designed to make you feel negative. And so you have to take it in very measured doses just to see what's going on versus becoming, I'll use the term addicted or engrossed with it and thinking that that's the way we ought to live. This celebrity culture that we have is that way, where people do things just to try to be celebrities. When I post socially on Twitter and I joke with people about, well, I see all these half-dressed women on there, and I don't think I can get away doing that. And they have all these followers and get all these reposts and everything, and you put out
don't sell yourself short, Richard. Don't sell yourself short.
You put out something positive and you get 3 or 4 reposts on it.
Yeah.
But the difference is we may touch someone positively, one person. It just takes one person. We never know. Whereas they touch thousands, but there's nothing positive out of it except a momentary stimulation, if you will. And so, again, we have to measure things differently on how we have impact. And we have to be satisfied knowing that if we're doing the right thing and doing it positively, there will be positive fruit from it.
You know, Nick Saban said, everybody wants what you have, but nobody wants to work as hard as you have worked.
Yeah.
And I think I just saw that on Twitter today. And I thought, what a great quote, although I don't know if everybody wants what I have, but I certainly think that people think that where I'm at now didn't take a lot of work, and it's taken a lot of work. And so I have a question for you that we'll jump in kind of 15 minutes or so, start to finish this up, but I have some other questions for you. But I wanted to ask you, I assume you're working on your next book, and what topic or what angle are you looking at if you aren't working on a book, what would you want to write about?
Well, the next project will be a continuation of the two before Life's Daily Treasure, which are kind of essays on common sense applied to current events and historical events, if you will, with a positive and a motivational and inspirational bent. And so that's kind of the day-to-day stuff that I do, but then I get kind of thrown to these other projects that I don't plan that all of a sudden come into play.
So, are you, quote, for hire to give speaking engagements, to be a keynote, to do things like that? I mean, let's talk a little bit about what the Richard Battle brand is right now, so my followers and listeners can learn a little more about how they may be able to use some of your services, or at least see what you do.
Well, yes. I mean, I enjoy speaking to groups because you get a feedback, you get an interaction, and you can adjust what you're saying based on nonverbal responses from an audience. And some of the things that I'm doing now, I diverted to do because of the COVID situation last year, kind of cut that down. And so I'm doing much more radio and TV and many other types of things now, done more books than I thought I would do because of that versus going and doing presentations. So I enjoy doing that. I think I have a lot of variety as well as depth of business and nonprofit type experience, nationally and internationally. And so I am an advisor to businesses as well, from the standpoint of trying to, I hate to use the word consultant. I don't like that word as much as an advisor, because I like to look at issues and obstacles and help come up with creative solutions. That's one of the things I enjoy most. And I do that from the platform. I do it from books. I do it interviews like this, and then I do it advising individuals or businesses on issues they may have. And so opportunities like that I enjoy and hope to find more of.
I think one of the things that I'm really focused on and trying to meet people like yourself and other people I've had as guests and vice versa is to break down some of the stigmas that we have as a society. And the big one is mental illness and mental health illness. And I wrote a blog recently where I said something to the effect about, is attention deficit a mental illness? Is, blah, 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 mental illness? And I said, is being human a mental illness? And I think my point is, we all, at some level, every single human that's ever walked the planet has had some level of a mental health illness, whether it's anxiety, depression, all the things that go in line with it. It may not be suicidal ideation. It may not be, bipolar or something like that. But I think when we look at people and say they have a mental illness, but I don't, again, I think that perpetuates the stigma. So I'm trying to bring down these labels to a more level playing field where it's okay to say, I'm Jeff Johnston, I have a mental illness, and my mental illness is, I'm hyper, I'm intense, I have attention deficit, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? Those are my superpowers. That's what makes me do what I do so well, or at least with passion. And other people are wanting to do a podcast, but they can't find the desire.
Yeah.
Someone with attention deficit, it's not a curse. So I meet kids all the time that are labeled with ADD, and I take the word D off because the last D stands for disorder.
Yeah.
I mean, that's criminal. How in the heck can attention deficit be anything other than an attribute to somebody if nurtured the correct way? Would you agree? I mean,
well, yeah.
That's one word.
First thing is our greatest strengths are very close to the issues that can be challenges. And so high energy and things like that are good. If they'd had drugs when I was in elementary school, they'd have had me drugged up so much about attention deficit.
Me too.
They didn't know. And so part of the issue is some of these things they call disorders now, again, it's such a negative thing, and it creates, there's all kinds of issues about it. Our parents and grandparents, one, they didn't have time to think about that. They were too busy trying to survive. And so if they had some issue that was inhibiting their success, They had to find through their family, through their church, neighbors, or something else,
Right.
help me to get through this and become better and succeed. Now, did everybody do that? No. But people didn't look to the government. They didn't look to some doctor for every little thing. And yes, there are things people need assistance on, but I think we're creating more and more dependency on
No
doctors and
question.
government versus
No
an
question.
independence and an interdependence on family and friends and neighbors in our church to help us in that situation. So I think I would like to get back to a better balance of that.
Yeah.
And I try to channel my energy because I'm very high energy and very outgoing, very positive, and try to channel all that into positive things. Whereas when I was a kid, I'd end up getting in trouble and having to write "I will not talk in class" 500 times and things of that nature because of that ADD.
It's so funny because you're so right. I mean, when I was younger and all my friends, we'd hang out together, 9, 10, 11, 12. All these words, all these terms, bipolar and schizophrenic and attention deficit and they weren't out there. My dad said little Jeffy's hyper. That's what ADD was just
Yeah.
you were hyper. And now it's like you get this stamp on your forehead. And I'm passionate about this because my son Seth was labeled attention deficit disorder and he was given Adderall. And that was the beginning of the end of him, was when he was given Adderall. So had not that diagnosis been so inaccurate and premature, he was just an intense kid. He was a very good guitarist. He was a very good basketball player. He had anger issues. He was intense. He was competitive. But what kid isn't at 13 years old, 14 years old? I mean, my dad used to always, and I say my dad a lot, he's a retired doctor, so he's fairly well knowledgeable on these things. But he said, you can't put in desire in kids, but you sure in heck can take it out of them.
Yes.
And his point was, once you have that, keep it, nurture it, make it your friend, make it a superpower. Don't take it out of you by giving you a pill or by telling you have a disease. I mean, how criminal is that? I just get so upset when I get going down that road. Is that and I say we because I was culpable as well when the doctor gave Seth Adderall. It was on my watch, Richard. I mean, I allowed it to happen. I didn't Google search it. Adderall's watered down methamphetamine. That's all it is. And I didn't do that. And I learned a very painful lesson. And I'm hoping I can teach other people that when doctors give a prescription, that's fine. You are allowed to go out and research it on your own. You're allowed to say no.
Yes, we all learn as we go, and so we can't beat ourselves up too much. You do the best you can every day. I do the best I can every day. And you talk about your son's energy and things of that nature and people's performance. Well, people perform at the level they're expected. And if you expect them to grow and become more successful and better, they will become more successful and better. If you tell them they're negative and there's something wrong with them and they can't do something, then they're going to think they can't do it and they won't do it. And again, society is putting more negativity in people now and creating more dependency than we've ever had before, whereas I think we need to give people an encouragement to become more independent and more successful and independent during their lives. And when we do that, they're going to do better. And I think football coaches are probably the best motivators like that, because the best ones, when somebody's doing poorly, they don't go beat them up. They pick them up off the ground and say, hey, you can do better, and I'm going to help you do better.
Right.
And then they say, the coach knows I can do better, and they go out and bust it, and they do better. And then when somebody does too well and they get the big head, well, then the coach says, hey, you're not as good as you think you are.
Right.
And that's the kind of motivation. We lift people when they're down, and we help them realize they should be more humble if they get the big head. It's a very simple formula that's worked for many, many years, and yet that's the exact opposite of what pop culture and the creation of this dependency culture is trying to put in everybody right now.
So how do we fix this?
Well, I think each of us has to do every day what we can to communicate these types of messages and reach as many people as we can to share this and try to fight back against this pop culture and this the culture of dependency and the negativity and things of that nature. I mean, simple things. I'll talk to people who are just really depressed and angry, and I'll find out they've got their television on the news channel all day long.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what network. If they're watching the news
Right.
all day long, they're going to be negative. And so I'll
Yep.
tell them, hey, I get up in the morning and I'll turn the news on to see if the world's still here or not. And once I get a few minutes of it and I realize everything is just moving along, then I can turn it off and go about my day and do something productive. And I'm much happier when I do that than if I sit and watch it for an hour or two.
I'm laughing because during the election, I didn't watch any of the election. I didn't watch any of the debates or anything. And I just by choice, this stuff doesn't interest me anymore like it used to. But one of my friends was like really irritated that I wasn't interested in watching the debates. And he said like, well, don't you want to be informed? I mean, don't you want to know what's going on? And I said, if knowing what's going on and being miserable is the result, then I'd rather be dumb and be happy. You know, I'd rather not know what's going on, but be happy than to know everything that's going on, every scandal, every behind the scenes breaking story, but be paranoid, be conspiracy theorist, be unhappy. Or my option is be uninformed to an extent. I mean, I'm on social media, I read articles and stuff, but I'm happy and I'm at peace in my life. I will take that any day than being smart and miserable. Any day.
Well, yes, but I don't think we have just a choice of two. But if
no, I know
we had a
I'm being
choice of
overly
two,
dramatic. Yeah.
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
But I think we can take it on a measured basis and have the best of
Right.
both worlds, and that would be
Yeah.
ideal. But the media wants us and wants our eyeballs and our eardrums every day, all day long, because of the advertising dollars they get. And things were much simpler back in the days when the TV went off at midnight. And when I was a little kid, I'd get up before 6 o'clock in the morning, and
Oh,
the
yeah.
test pattern was on the TV on Saturday morning because the TVs were off for 6 hours, and
Yeah.
things were much better. But the 24-hour news cycle has bred this culture of trying to get people locked in all the time. And they do
Well-
it for the money and the influence, and it's not to our betterment.
I come from the investment background, so I own a wealth management firm here in Cedar Rapids called Premier Investments of Iowa. I have 9 advisors and 5 full-time staff, and we said that the worst invention ever for the average investor was the internet, because back in the day when my dad was in his 30s, his quarterly statement showed up 4 times a year in the mailbox. Okay. My dad was raising 4 boys. He was working for the Iowa basketball team. He was a doctor at the University of Iowa. He'd look at his statement, okay, I got X number of dollars, and threw it out, you know, and payroll deduction, all this stuff was automatic.
Yeah.
It was set it and forget it. And now today, all day long on their phone, people are looking at their 401k like it's a darn horse race.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at the average rate of returns in the 60s, compared to the average rate of returns today, they woefully underperform today than they did in the 60s. And you think to yourself, well, how can that be? Because there's more investments, they're lower cost, they're more available, they're easily available, you can buy them for free on your phone. And yet in the 60s, you had to call your broker up and literally drive down to his office and buy a stock, and you got a certificate in the mail. And it was so archaic, but they made money back then for one reason. Investing is now gambling.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. I do something today. I'll just check mine once a week, but I keep a Excel spreadsheet and I track it every week. But then I've got it back almost 20 years, week over week, year over year.
Yeah.
And so when there's a bad week and I feel bad about it and I log it in at the end of the week, then I look at where was it a year ago this week? Where was it 2 years ago this week?
Yeah,
And
that's
I feel
fine. That's
better,
harmless.
so much faster.
Yep.
And so
Right.
that's another way to compare it.
But you don't look and say, where was it 2 hours ago?
No.
But that's what people do today.
Well, yeah,
and that's
you
how
can
they manage
see it on the charts when they
Right.
do the intraday trading and things like
Yeah.
that. Well, the
Right.
more narrow the focus, the more negative it's going to be. And another way I'll put that is, don't let the problems of today bite at our ankles like a bunch of yapping dogs.
Yeah.
And they take our focus off the future to look at our ankles, which is the moment. And that creates more negativity than looking long term. The longer term we look, the better perspective we have.
And there's such a lesson to be learned in the investment world and going to just overall mental health, because I think as on the mental health side, for mental health, substance abuse, and addiction, everything's a horse race. Everything's right now. My depression has to be cured right now. You know, it's like nobody wants to work 10 years to get your mental health improved. I've worked 5 years hard, very hard, to get to where I'm at. It didn't happen overnight, with many setbacks and probably more on the way. And there's something to say about rewards in life that are given to you over time if you're patient, versus the gambler that lacks one thing only. The difference between a gambler and investor is time. Gamblers have none of it. Investors have all of it. And I think if we can use that metaphor, that analogy, whatever you want to say, towards improving well-being and mental health for people, it's a process. It's a long-term game. And you need to have a good offensive line, a good defensive line, a good quarterback, a good running back. Just like you got to not drink, not smoke, not eat pizza every day, work out. That's how you form your team, along with maybe a therapist and somebody that you like to read their books. I mean, whatever your toolbox is filled with. I think that's how we get past where we are with all the numbers on mental health going the wrong way.
Yeah, and one of the points I made in the four-letter word that builds character, one of the 14 points about that was the benefits of deferred gratification.
Absolutely.
And I think that we've lost that, not only in financial, but almost everything else. Everybody wants everything right now.
Right.
And we have some people advocating that if your dream is denied, it's if your dream's delayed, it's denied. Whereas I said earlier, a dream delayed is not denied. And so we have to help share with people. Just because you can't have something today doesn't mean you won't have it, and have it better than what you might have it today. And we need to be able to share stories and illustrations that share that versus the negativity that comes from the pressure of the moment.
Right. Well, listen, my friend, I've absolutely enjoyed this hour. It's been a fast hour, like they seem to go very fast. How can people reach you, and what's the best way to contact you, I guess?
My website is richardbattle.com. The contact information is there. All of the books are there. They're also on Amazon under Richard V. Battle, and we have several videos on YouTube under that as well, and would love the opportunity to talk to people.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the time you've taken out of your busy schedule, and for anybody that follows me or listens to me, the goal of the Living Undeterred project and mindset is to find people that can add that extra arrow to your quiver or that tool to your tool belt. And I see 8 arrows behind you. I see 8 books behind you. And are your books an audiobook? I wanted to ask you that before we got off.
That's a good question. 5 or 6 of them are on Kindle, and 4 of them are on audiobook.
Okay, I'll make sure to pass that information on. So, listen, I very much appreciate it, and I really enjoy following your story and what you're doing. And as I tell every guest on the show, and I'm not sure I need to tell you this, but make sure you keep living undeterred, my friend.